This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated online streaming service showing exceptional films from around the globe. Get your first month for free at mubi.com/royalocean.
This is an announcement about picture day. Freshman class portrait at 9:30. Sophomore class portrait at 10:30.
You more engaged yet? No, but we got it all worked out. We're still gonna be going together so we can date other people and screw around. I know. Hey, I hear college girls really put out.
I think one of the many charms of Paul Thomas Anderson's films is the way that they wear their influences in a way that's clear but that doesn't distract. It's easy to find the works of Robert Altman or Scorsese or Hitchcock or any number of others reflected in his work, but rarely do I think that they overshadow. That's something I've been thinking about since first seeing Licorice Pizza and its opening shot homage to American graffiti. And it's one of the things that I think a great movie can do. Remind and recall what came before, but still be completely of itself. A proper remix in that sense that doesn't just descend into mimicry. A couple of years ago, I talked about this same idea with a video that I did about Inception, zooming out and looking at the history of influences building up and leading to it. And I think it would be interesting to do the same here, looking at both the movies that Anderson has cited and those that I think are ingredients, somewhere even unconsciously in the background.
It's a pleasure to meet you, Gary. I want you to be horrified. Okay. Your life's on the line. But you know from that, right? It's way the streets.
A number of Licorice Pizza's individual stories were inspired by Anderson's pal Gary Getzman, a former child actor who starred in movies like Yours, Mine, and Ours, before going on to produce films for the likes of Tom Hanks, Mike Nichols, and Jonathan Demme, the director of hits like Philadelphia and The Silence of the Lambs, and who just so happens to be one of PTA's longtime cinematic idols. There's a great article on Bright Wall Dark Room by the writer Ethan Warren, who makes an interesting comparison between Licorice Pizza and the low-budget features Demme got his start with that's a good jumping-off point. Demme's early pictures were scrappy stories that focused on a collection of misfits, on groups of scruffy oddballs, weirdos, and lowlifes who live in America's blue-collar backroads, a world of strip clubs, bus stations, and crappy motels, and who often struggle, never really seeming to get ahead, always tripped up by their own bad decisions and just plain rotten luck. Warren draws a particular connection between Gary and the titular Melvin of Melvin and Howard.
Dumar. Melvin. First name.
In the midst of a punishing environment, Melvin is an unsquashable dreamer. He's the type who's never quite able to hold down a job and never quite able to keep his family intact, and would probably come across as pathetic if he didn't exude such optimism every step of the way. A genuine confidence that everything will work out one day. He's a selfish screw-up, but an endearing one. A lovable loser who's tenacious but foolish.
Melvin, you're a loser!
Don't call me that!
Well, what do you call it the first time we got a prayer getting ahead? You go out and buy a big fancy boat and a big fancy car?
That stuff is an investment, I told you that.
Licorice Pizza may trade Demme's Middle America for Anderson's beloved San Fernando Valley, but the two characters are of the same ilk. Gary is more a showman and hustler, but like Melvin, he's infatigable and obnoxiously overconfident. His ventures have a tendency to fall apart, but he attacks life in the same undefeatable way, constantly pivoting and reinventing himself along the way. Put the two next to one another, and you can see the kind of adult Gary is probably destined to grow up to be, forever scraping by with a grand new venture to get rich, but always getting tripped up. And yet embodying one of Licorice Pizza's core ideas, that the only way you can respond is to keep going, to keep hustling, to keep running. To continue, there are certainly a number of individual sequences reminiscent of titles like Taxi Driver and The Wages of Fear, and arguably a couple of notes from Fellini. One in the eccentric and even grotesque side characters that occupy the world, and a Fellini-esque spirit in the central Tale of the Cock sequence halfway through with Sean Penn and Tom Waits, that descends into a similar kind of rambunctious, carnivalesque sprawl that Fellini was so good at letting run rampant. Genre-wise though, Licorice Pizza slots in nicely alongside a host of other coming-of-age hangout movies. It has all of the nostalgia and anthropology of Dazed and Confused, and a taste of the raucous comedy of Fast Times at Ridgemont High. But the movie that I think it draws from the most is American Graffiti. If you've hung around my channel, you've probably heard me wax lyrical about this before. American Graffiti is a movie that has such a tangible texture to it, and part of that is because Lucas shot the movie in Techniscope, a format primarily used in the 60s and 70s that gave low-budget productions the ability to shoot anamorphically, but at a cheaper rate, by only using half of a standard 35mm frame. What that translated to was a lower quality image, but one that Lucas and his cinematographers specifically wanted, as it gave the picture a dirtier, gritty quality that resembled the handcrafted look of 16mm. And the result was gorgeous. The more that Anderson has directed, the more that he's pursued a similar kind of rough palette. For Licorice Pizza, he and co-cinematographer Michael Bauman sought to capture a similar kind of raw naturalism. Take a look at a scene like this. Instead of the street being entirely lit up, there's an emphasis on restriction, using as few sources as possible to light up the characters as they walk. That kind of enforced limitation is all over American Graffiti, and it's here too, giving Licorice Pizza an almost lo-fi charm, something that's complemented all the more by the fact that the teenagers on screen actually look like teenagers, pimples and all. Furthermore, I think that there's an interesting connection you could make with both films on a narrative level that also serves to highlight how genres develop and the way that film history is the story of movies constantly building upon one another. Anderson has cited American Graffiti as an influence on Licorice Pizza in the same way that Lucas cited Fellini. Lucas took a narrative cue from Fellini's film I Vitelloni, a shaggy, melancholic story told through vignettes of overgrown young men stuck in adolescence, and remixed it into something new, in the same way that I think Anderson is taking a narrative cue from American Graffiti. There's a flow between the three of them in that sense, as one inspires the next. Graffiti is about a group of teenagers stuck in the murky crossroads between youth and adulthood, centering in on the last night before two of them are leaving for college. Except, well,
I don't think I'm gonna be going tomorrow.
Come on, what are you talking about?
Well, I was thinking I could wait a year, go to city.
the heart of the story is here with Kurt, and the tug-of-war within him between staying home or leaving. As the narrative unfolds, Kurt spends the night moving through a series of vignettes, little episodes, and in each one, he meets someone who acts as a portrait of Arrested Development, people who are all stuck there in the town, unable to escape.
No, really, I'd like to, but I can't. I mean, if old Mr. Simpson came in here and saw me dancing with one of you sexy little... Excuse me.
There's his old beloved teacher, flirting with students like he's still one of them and probably sleeping with another. There are the childish, rebellious pharaohs that he pulls pranks and rampages around with. There's his ex-girlfriend wanting things between them to be rekindled.
I'm really glad you're gonna stay.
Even Milner, Kurt's friend, is like the overgrown boy who refuses to grow up.
I ain't going off some goddamn fancy college. I'm staying right here, having fun as usual.
For as much as Kurt may wish to stay home, each of them act like a kind of warning sign against immaturity, against the regret Kurt will likely come to feel if he stays behind. It's only the words of Wolfman Jack, the last person that he meets, that finally pushes him to take the step into adulthood that he needs to.
There's a great, big, beautiful world out there. And here I sit, sucking on popsicles.
Why don't you leave?
I'm not a young man anymore.
And I think Anderson is doing something similar within Licorice Pizza, remixing the germ of that structure into something new for Alana's journey, using the story's vignettes and the characters that she encounters in a way that's not entirely dissimilar.
I need to get my life together.
Like Kurt, Alana is stuck in a tug-of-war between youth and adulthood, unable to really grow up. Her story is almost paradoxical. For as much as she feels the pressure to get her act together and join the real world, she's constantly bombarded and confused by that world and the adults she encounters within it, nearly all of whom are rendered in ways that are grimy, grotesque, or often just deeply sad. She's granted attention, but from people who view her like a piece of meat, What's alluring turns out to be reckless and dangerous, and the men often just grown-up teenagers, as juvenile as ever. Even the most upstanding figure she can find ultimately just wants to use her to his own advantage. Where Kurt is warned and ultimately steered away from trying to stay 17 forever, I think Alana is warned about the darker, painful, hidden realities of a world that views people as little more than objects. One is encouraged to grow up, the other is warned about what you find when you get there. And where Kurt is prompted to leave home, Alana is prompted to run back to the one person she feels any real connection with. This has of course been the subject of much conversation over the last couple of months, the age gap between Alana and Gary. It's a little bit Harold and Maude, and a little bit Last Picture Show, and a little bit Rushmore, and there's actually an amusing connection here you may have read about with Clint Eastwood's film Breezy from the early 70s, that starred William Holden in a May-December relationship, that's used here as ostensibly the movie we see Alana audition for.
Gee, I'm no mystery, Frankie. I come from Intercourse, Pennsylvania. Yes, I know, and I've heard all the jokes.
I didn't say a word.
I know, I've heard all the jokes.
I didn't say a word.
It gets better. You have to pass through.
Faithful to get there. Ooh.
What a cross to bear.
But actually, I think this is a good place to dovetail into our final section. There are obviously multiple ways that Licorice Pizza builds upon the rest of Anderson's previous films, but I'd like to highlight what I think is one of the main ways. More than anything else, Gary and Alana are the latest in PTA's long line of mismatched relationships between misfits, all of whom find connection in unlikely places. This is one of his longtime obsessions. Gary and Alana are like a miniature Reynolds and Alma, or Lancaster and Freddie. Two souls inextricably drawn together like magnets. One a charismatic but entitled entrepreneur, and the other a wayward soul whose role in the relationship modulates between partner, muse, and pawn. In fact, from the whole of his lineup, Phantom Thread is the film that I think is most in the background here. Like Alma, Alana's role is never quite clear. To Gary, she's alternately and all at once a love interest, business partner, chaperone, and even a kind of surrogate parent, as Gary's mother is mostly absent throughout. And like Phantom Thread, it's the ever-shifting nature of the relationship that becomes the battleground for much of the story's drama, as the dynamics between them continually shift, progressing and receding like pieces on a chessboard as the two move in and out of sync with one another.
You think that the world revolves around Gary Valentine and whatever stupid shit you come up with.
It does.
It doesn't.
It does.
It doesn't. It's about more.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
Alana, you would still be taking pictures at my high school of children if it wasn't for me.
Their relationship may not be as overtly manipulative as Reynolds and Alma's, but it's obviously no less messy. This is what Anderson has always done, though. His films trudge through the strange paths and twisted mechanics that relationships are made up of. To say that their relationship is problematic, or whatever word you'd like to use, is, I think at least, to state the obvious. Like all of Anderson's misfits, their relationship is indeed messy and imperfect and unwise, but in a way that's altogether honest and human. For as odd a duo as they are, Gary and Alana do sharpen one another, providing what the other needs. There's another obvious connection here with Phantom Thread, but perhaps an even better one with Punch Drunk Love, and its lightning strike of connection that cuts through a feeling of loneliness. Underneath Licorice Pizza is a similar kind of melancholy, a quiet ache for something more.
You're gonna be rich in a mansion by the time you're 16. I'm gonna be here, taking photos of kids for their yearbooks when I'm 30. You're never gonna remember me.
I'm not gonna forget you. Just like you're not gonna forget me.
And like nearly all of Anderson's films, we're left with a conclusion that's not so final. Again, like Phantom Thread, we're given a picture of a cycle, a pattern between Gary and Alana that will no doubt continue. In the same way that Alma will once again poison Reynolds long after the credits have finished rolling, the portrait of Alana and Gary's relationship that we've gotten comes with the implication that they too will drift apart again, perhaps just destined to forever flow in and out of sync with one another. I think it's a bittersweet ending in that regard. Like Boogie Nights and its happy ending in quotations, Anderson chooses to cap everything here on a moment of happiness, to despite the fact that it's one with a looming expiration date. There are of course many ways that Licorice Pizza builds on what came before. This is by no means an exhaustive list, and I would love to know what you think. What films you see lingering in the background here, and in what ways you think Anderson is building on his own work. Looking at a movie through its influences isn't the only way, of course, to look at a film, but it is one that I think can provide insight into the way that ideas evolve and the way that genre develops, and can also just be a lot of fun. Let me know what you think. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching. This video is brought to you by the good folks at Mubi. If you don't know, Mubi is a curated streaming service that premieres a new film every day. From exciting work by up-and-coming filmmakers, to timeless classics from master directors, to cult favorites you've never seen, there's always something new to discover. And in the age of numerous streaming services, I think theirs is a strategy that's really brilliant. With Mubi, I found that I wind up spending significantly less time browsing through endless titles and adding a bunch of things to watch lists that I've never seemed to be able to get through, and more time actually watching. And for me, it's resulted in the discovery of a host of great new films I'd never even heard of before. You can stream or download their movies on any screen or device, anytime, anywhere. I can't recommend them enough. If you're interested in giving Mubi a try, you can get an entire month of great cinema for free by going to Mubi.com/RoyalOcean to sign up today.